Any quick? Is that okay? All right. So that brings me to the real point I think I want to make, which is the importance of thinking about, maybe even obsessing about, power. That if we don't bring power more and more into our conversations as a grassroots movement attempting to change big conditions and injustices, then we may miss the mark. And the question of power is, you could say it's you're asking what are the underlying power dynamics of the situation, and how do we build power together to change the situation? Martin Luther King, if you're thinking about this as I am increasingly, and by the way, it's something I remember hearing several times in some of the lectures I saw, including in the very moving session about farm workers, right? So power is a question that we look at both in the fields, but also in the kind of the industry and the economy. So Martin Luther King was one of the people who thought a lot about power, and I always found this interesting that towards the end of his life, right? He didn't know it was at the end of his life. He thought he was at a stage of the movement, which was stretching for the next thing. And in the point of reflection, he said, "Our nettlesome task today is to discover how to organize the strength into compelling power so that the government cannot elude our demands." Fascinating to me. I think, what? They did so much, and yet he felt that they hadn't achieved power. And there's a lot in there. I'll leave that as a question to reflect on. Why did he not feel that they had power? So let me now turn into the Real Food Challenge and how we think about power. And in particular, what I just want to do is just talk about 4 principles in the process of that we have discovered in creating change and building power together. I've gotten ahead of myself. I'll be there in just one second. So the change. I should be clear about what we are. Here we go. Back again. What are we trying to change? So the Real Food Challenge was launched in 2008 as a coalition of students and faculty and dining service professionals and organizations. And the idea was to harness the buying power of universities and the political power of youth, students, to create change through that whole supply chain. And the goal that we had, and I personally, those of us who co-founded it were inspired by different people. I was personally heavily inspired by Anna LePay, who had done a lot of thinking about the importance of procurement in universities, like in the sweatshop, anti-sweatshop movement. So the goal at the time was to shift $1 billion. This is what we said. Could we shift $1 billion of college food budgets, which would be about 20% or about a fifth of the total, to real food by 2020? And what we came to define as real food was local and community-based, fair, so fair trade, domestic fair trade, cooperatives, et cetera, ecologically sound, and or humane. Again, so the idea was we were going to try to divest, in effect, divest school budgets from industrial agriculture and shift it to a real food economy as quickly as we could. And I'm getting ahead again. Okay, but I should get there because so the first principle I'll highlight, and I'm going to do these quickly as well, so we have as much time as possible for talking. Power. The first one is power and leverage, power mapping and leverage. There are a lot of great examples I'd love to, or a few that I would have liked to cite. Actually, I'll just do this one with a coalition of Immokalee workers. The ability to have a sharp analysis, sophisticated analysis, and to direct your action is one of the key turning points in many movements and campaigns. So I'll refer back to the Eric Schlosser talking about the coalition of Immokalee workers, who had for years worked to change the conditions, and it was only when they redrew their power map were they able to speed towards victory. Same for Alice Paul in the women's suffrage movement 100 years ago. Changing tactics and by changing the power map. In our case, the way that we looked at leverage was by understanding that the college market is really just a slice of the entire, not a big slice of the entire food system, the food economy, which is $1 trillion. But it's a particularly profitable and competitive one. So those companies that we're talking about compete like crazy for contracts which could be tens of millions of dollars a year and last for 5 to 10 years. And it's a captive audience. Very few businesses have such a devoted and steady source of income that they know ahead of time. So no wonder that they really compete for it. So that leverage and the fact that those companies are linked to other ones, like distributors throughout the food system, means that if we can make change here, we can perhaps set a pace for change throughout. So that was our version of leverage. And what's been really important is to have make public commitments, to have universities make public commitments to real food. So by signing on to our Real Foods Campus commitment, for instance, and that by doing it publicly and in a uniform way, it focuses the attention of the industry and the companies on the fact that a change is happening. And so even if they're looking at a self-operated school, right, one that runs their own dining hall that is not contracted, and they see that they made a commitment and they ever want to get that business, they understand they have to begin to change their practices. And so to date, we've had over 60 universities make those commitments. Most recently, the University of Pittsburgh and University of Utah. And altogether, we've committed now, students have worked to shift $65 million towards real food sources. The second principle is transparency and accountability. And in this case, I'm referring to in our case, the Real Food Calculator, but transparency and accountability, or information, who has information, who has the ability to monitor promises that are made, is a critical element of who has power and shifting power dynamics. So we have had, we've created a calculator, a set of criteria, and a way of measuring that students at over 100 universities in this country are using to audit their own and assess their own dining services, and to share that information more publicly. I'm going to go quickly. So this is our. We're testing it out as an online tool, and it allows us to do things like this to show the percentage of real food. I'm going to go quickly through this. These are calculator to the kind of things we can see at a university from year to year that help us break down really precisely where is that food coming from. So, but I'll go quickly because I want to get to other things. So the other thing I mentioned about transparency and accountability is this picture, which is not a great photo at all, but I love what's behind it, which is it's a meeting at UMass Amherst, and it's over 100 students and community members showed up to discuss how they were going to spend the $4.6 million each year that they had decided to spend on real food. One of the questions that came up there was, do we want just any fair trade bananas, or do we want ones that are specifically from small farmers and not from plantation? And students did research there to come up with an answer and present it to others. So the other principle, the third I would bring up, is solidarity and allyship. Again, whole workshop on this and much more, and a lifelong of learning. But this is really about, for us, being in relationship, and the kind of relationship that I kind of feel like Steve Gleason talked about, in relationship with producers and those we are trying to affect, because it is their direction and their knowledge which needs to guide our work. And so one example of this is the fish camp we had last year in Boston with students from 7 universities who got together with fisher folk from the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance and from processing plant workers. And what we're trying to do there is to really understand, do the criteria, the labels around seafood that exist, actually serve small boat fishermen well? Do we need to adjust our own criteria, learning from them? And how can we support them on their policy battles as they struggle to stay on the water? And are there species of fish which are not often utilized and often can be thrown away that we could actually use in the dining hall and create income for them and also awareness for students?